Well, very good morning to you if you're in the Caribbean or the Americas. Good afternoon if you're in Europe and the Middle East, and good evening to you in the Asia Pacific region. Very warm welcome to today's Crossing Borders broadcast, the IMC streaming service created to keep investment migrations professionals connected and together. It's a very special broadcast today. As you can see, it's not my usual studio-like background. I'm currently in Brussels. I've extended my stay in Brussels. There's been a lot happening in the past 3 or 4 days. In particular focus with the beautiful island nation of Cyprus, which has decided just yesterday to suspend and effectively close its investment migration program from the 1st of November. So there is a lot of chit chat, there's a lot of talk going on in the European Parliament, but also in the European Commission. So I've been hanging around and having some discussions on that subject. So a little bit more about that in today's timely broadcast. But before we kick off, if you haven't seen one of these broadcasts before, don't worry, you can watch all of the previous programs on catch up through our YouTube channel. And please don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. So remember, you can ask questions during today's broadcast in the widget, which is on the right hand of your screen, and you'll also find some useful handouts about the Investment Migration Council, about some of the services that we offer the investment migration community, but also some information about the company and the representative that is speaking as my guest today. So they are, I can see, just over 50 viewers with us today. So if you want to tell us where you're from, you can use the chat function, and there's also the questions function on the right hand of your screen. So do send in some questions. We try and keep these as interactive as possible with our viewers. And as ever, to keep you engaged, we've got a little bit of a poll just to find out where everybody is from today. So I'm just going to launch that now, and that should be coming up on your screen. So where are you watching us from today? So we stop the poll at when we get to about 85 people, or 85% response rate. Just at 75% now. 80, oh, that's gone up quickly. That's gone up to 94% of you have voted. So I'm going to close that off now, and I'm going to share the results with you. So overwhelmingly with a European and African audience, with 80% of today's viewers, and then an equal weighing between the Asia Pacific, Middle East, and the Americas, with coming in with 7% each. So that's quite interesting, good for us to know, and good for you to know also. Remember, there's a short video at the end of today's program about how you can get qualified through the certification in investment migration, so do stay with us. But enough about that, and let's get straight to today's broadcast. Now, it's interesting. We are going to be discussing the world of investment migration, but how it faces major security challenges. Some programs are used sometimes for criminal purposes, and these can definitely permanently undermine the reputation of a country or even an entire region, and of course it undermines the reputation of the investment migration sector as a whole. Then, of course, you have the emergence of new programs, which must be accompanied with new and increasingly powerful crime-fighting tools, including the use of artificial intelligence, but also of next generation biometric watch lists. So to discuss these points, please allow me to introduce today's speaker. I'm going to hide the poll results and introduce our speaker, who I can see is online with us, but we're unable to see him as yet.
Yeah.
So
I have a problem with the camera.
You have a problem with your camera, no worries.
Yeah.
Okay, Damien Martinez is the Chief Executive of FACEPOINT, based in France, just down the road from here in Belgium. He's the founding chief executive of FACEPOINT, which is a crime tech company specialized in picture intelligence and facial recognition. Damien, before that, was specialized in terrorism financing prevention, and interestingly enough, cut his teeth and as an expert investigator for the September 11th class action on Al-Qaeda financing. Then worked as an expert for the Swiss Federal Police and as a specialized compliance officer for Credit Suisse in Zurich. And Damien, you're also the founding associate of the Center for Analysis on Terrorism, a European think tank based in Paris. Damien, we can't see you. Hopefully, your camera will come back on. But what can you tell us? There's a lot has been happening about the landscape of global financial crime in recent weeks. Of course, the FinCEN leaks a few weeks ago have taken up a lot of the headlines. The global financial crime landscape and the exposure to political risks. What is your viewpoint on these important issues?
So thank you, Bruno, and thank you for the IMC for inviting me to discuss this subject, which has been very important to me over the last few years. I do apologize about the camera. I think that there is a conflict with some other tools using my camera in the meantime, so I apologize for that. I try to be as clear as possible in my talk with you. I was a while ago on the advisory of the IMC, on the advisory board of the IMC. I was very proud about this. But since I left and I'm still in touch with some of the members of the organization, I would say that times have changed quite a lot. So it goes by saying that I'm not a professional of the investment migration like these people on the call today. I'm more a professional of the investigation and the open source intelligence and the watch list screening business. So all sorts of things which are being used to vet an applicant. All things considered, I think that the work you're trying to do, and I can testify that Bruno and the team at IMC, you do a lot regarding due diligence alongside with very established brand on the market. The know your customer in banking is actually a sort of replication of the know your citizen mechanisms that you're trying to put in place. But I wouldn't see why it's so hard to do it in banking and that it would be so easy to do it in the migration industry. I think that exactly is the same limitations apply, the same constraints, and in the end, the same difficulties. So yeah, this is something which is again, this should be a discussion, so I'm open very much for comments or remarks if you disagree, but I think that the overall programs, compliance programs globally are now suffering from, I would say, a sort of efficiency syndrome. It was particularly true with the last publications by the ICIJ around the FinCEN documents. We showed clearly that there is a sort of after 20 years of compliance exercise, billions and billions invested in this field. Speaking about banking only, but also corporate, there is clearly now over time after 20 years a sort of not a fatigue, but let's say there is a need for finding new tools and a new approach into the domain, which remains, in my view, and I don't know if you agree, Bruno, with that, is that there is still a huge regulatory and reputational pressure, which is getting, I would have thought that it would have diminished a bit over time, but it's getting extremely intense. It's just the opposite which is happening now. So not a single day goes by without a scandal in the press. It's even more true, like with what's happening now in Cyprus. So there is a huge and extreme media and political pressure around this focus. I would even say a general public opinion focus on what they call a golden visa, and they have a sort of public, there is a sort of public orientation on the RBI and CBI programs. So yeah. Go.
I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, you asked me, sort of briefly my thoughts on this, and definitely there is a disparity between the levels of due diligence, the standards that are undertaken between different programs in different countries, in different, sort of continents globally. There isn't this one common approach, and this is something that we at the IMC have been advocating for about 2.5 years, and we created a working group which subsequently provided with 2 reports on due diligence, the state of play, and we proposed minimum standards, which we have been communicating to policymakers on exactly on this subject, on how to standardize this to limit the risk. Because it is of concern to policymakers. It's increasingly concerning for members of the public who often only get a negative perception of investment migration, rather than being told that it is a force for good in attracting talent and debt-free liquidity into their countries. So yeah, I pretty much in agreement with you, in fact, on this point.
So the point is, contrary to the past, now we know that this kind of risk and this kind of exposure can be instrumented. So basically, if you know a program with vulnerabilities and with some, let's say, some clear vulnerabilities, politically speaking or administratively speaking, it can be really a killing point. So I think that recently, I mean, what we can see, especially around the Cyprus program, there is a risk a political risk to kill a program, or even temporarily. But let's say, I was wondering myself, preparing today this conversation with you, Bruno, how many professionals were impacted? I mean, immigration professionals and agents, depending from this revenue, and we know how it represents from a Cyprus perspective. But let's say today, with all the new form of journalism, investigations, the kind of information war in the background operated by some, let's say, quite aggressive states, which are playing an asymmetric information war on some particularly trendy topic, like, for example, investment migration. This kind of thing can be, extremely complicated to handle from a political perspective. So my point of view is that today, the only solution is to harden the robustness of the due diligence program, exactly like with the 38 pages memo you did with Refinitiv and with Exeger and all the key stakeholders on that perspective. And I would say one thing which is important to me: the hardening and the strengthening of these programs is also very important for 2 reasons. The first is one we said about political and reputational exposure of these programs, and the long-term run. Today, let's say there is a higher scrutiny and a higher due diligence for any, let's say, applicants benefiting from this program in the let's say regulated banking industry. But the second reason is also very important to me, and I think to the IMC community. it's the extreme diversity of criminal risk. When these, let's say, it has changed a lot since the first program back in the late 2000. At the time, the criminal factors were different and they were maybe less diverse. Today, there is a huge diversification of serious criminality in cybercrime, in environmental crime, in corruption, multiple geographies coming up, China, Africa, many countries. And so the risk is amplified. And so this is a key factor which was not let's say obvious to everyone some years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, but now it becomes really complex to handle. So yeah, this is something that from our perspective, us as a research and a research intelligence company, we, even us on our side, we employ today 70 people. It's hard to follow with the bad actors, as we call them.
Yeah.
We can cope. There are many jurisdictions, many cases open all over the world, many scenarios. And so how could it be that an agent or a program would know as much as we do? So it's a really complicated as a question.
We've had a question coming in. I'm going to try and word this a little bit differently. How do you, and this is something we spoke about on briefly before we came on air, how do you propose to undertake due diligence on politicians that may be involved in programs, either through their cabinet positions, in that's, they're directly responsible as part of their portfolio, or they're attached to the Ministry of Finance in a country, which ultimately perhaps signs off on an application. How do you undertake potential due diligence on, politicians really that are involved in the programs? Because a lot of, obviously, due diligence is done on the clients. We, for the most part, know that. But how does the politician fit into this?
Be sure that the EU and member states do it. I mean, if I would be, let's say, a major European country, I would do that before going deeper into, let's say, the analysis and the robustness of a program itself. I would first look at who is handling it, who is managing it at the political and administrative level. And this is a key question. I mean, this is a tricky question, and I'm glad you're asking this, because it really proves, asking the question, that the IMC is completely neutral in the question. And so it really proves the value. Yeah, and this is what is now on the table with Cyprus, but some other countries in the world. It's not worth, let's say, putting so many efforts in having a right onboarding verification, or doing all sorts of verifications, all sorts of due diligence steps, as the one you described in your documentation, the one released earlier this year, if in the end the ones in charge of operating the program as parallel route, and which is a clear demonstration of corruption. So yes, today, to be clear, there might be some due diligence to be done onto the operators of this program, but it's not, it's I mean, investment migration is not the only place in the world where you have this kind of paradox. On some other, on some other departments, that's the same. So,
yeah. What other sort of similar industries would you say are quite similar in this respect?
So I would say for government sourcing, for example, it's a clear, when you look at it's simple. I mean, simple. You go to the FATF publications onto the investigative reports from the FATF on the sources of corruption and the main fields of corruption. And so you find places, even in governments, which are subject to this kind of thing. So typically you have the sourcing, for example, buyers for governments. So governmental sourcing, where it can be also contracting, where you have some solicitations for parallel routes and for bribery, to make it clear. So, but for just to know, for very large due diligence companies, which is not the case of FACEPOINT. FACEPOINT, we are a screening company. So what we do, we're going to come to it in a minute, it's a bit different. But let's say for in-depth investigation companies like the one I cited before, the one who contributed to the report, after having made thousands of due diligence and due diligence reports all over the world over the last 20 years, they know precisely which are the key vulnerabilities, not only in corporations, but also in governments.
Okay, Damien, I want to talk about biometrics in the response to, international threats, in the context, particularly of, citizenship by investment programs. But before we do that, let's maybe sort of take a step back and look at, the last 15, 20 years of efforts that have been made in money laundering prevention. And specifically the investment migration industry, which has grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry with some 80-odd citizenship or residency programs. What's your perspective on? Give us a little bit of a background on the efforts that have been made in this regard, and then we'll
for me it's really a very, very interesting question. And it echoes your activities at the IMC, because for me, if I would work with you with the IMC and in this word, I would say that it's a word which is fascinating because it's highly dependent on information, and I would even say more than this, it's highly dependent on intelligence. So I would say it's exactly like in banking when I was working with Credit Suisse Central Compliance in Zurich. So when you got a client coming up and knocking your door to become a customer, an ultra networks client or whatever, you need to have a background information on him or her. And this puts you in the shoes of someone which is not a banker anymore. So you need to get an insight. You need to know who this person is.
Right.
So the great subjects for me remains on the dependence of information, and I would even say the intelligence dependence, in the case of the investment migration industry. So but it's not the work of let's say, of an agent, of a lawyer, or a banker to have investigation skills and to, let's say, to build up a infrastructure or knowledge management capability. So you need to rely on third parties. It is where your relationships with the due diligence providers, with the watchlist providers is so important, because it's an interdependent relationship, especially in this world where you have multiple information, multiple watch lists, multiple sanction lists. So if you're somewhere out of La Valette or elsewhere in the world, or in Monaco or elsewhere in the world, and you need to get intelligence about this Vietnamese guy, not sharing even the same alphabet, not sharing, nothing in common with the target, nothing in common that you can have a quick info in. It becomes a very, very complex exercise.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about perhaps the clearer view that we might have on the threats to investments migration? Can you tell us about that?
So I think now, which is good, after all these years of operations in the world of, I would say even because there is a date of the very beginning of all these international threats. You can put the cursor with the September 11 attacks in the United States, and I would say that with this 20 years long AML history, the focus has changed over time. So at the very beginning, it started with terrorism financing, then it moved to organized crime, then there was a special focus in the late 2000 around tax evasion. There was a clear focus around 2010 around corruption. Now there are, let's say, trendy topics around environmental crime and this kind of things. It moves every time. So the regulatory trends, and let's say the focus is moving over years. But which is interesting from in your industry is that we can clearly now know, because of, let's say, the thousands of due diligence which were provided, the thousands of checks which were made over time, and so around the red flags we have accumulated over time, we now know that there are specific drivers which are coming again and again. So sanctions breach is now coming. I mean, is still coming high on the list. Sanctions breach. When you know the complexity about the new sanctions regime, that's the same. You need to rely heavily on let's say third-party providers. I would say there is a great classical around money laundering and all the predicated offenses, including tax evasion. So these are the two, I would say, key drivers and key risk factors in your industry, from my knowledge. But again, I'm outside. I'm just operating a threat intelligence company. But this is what comes in my mind are the key risk factors. And again, you can document this. I mean, if you speak with the CBI units and if you speak with the data providers, you can make speech the data. You can have a sort of a regulatory trend around your exposure.
All right. So that's super interesting. Well, we see clearly. I think most, everybody would know that unless you're a newbie to the industry. But clearly, regulatory regimes instituted by the EU or OECD or the policymakers, State Departments in the US and so forth, requires financial institutions, lawyers, accountants, to consider CBI and RBI applicants as high risk, essentially, because of the vast amounts of money that is being moved around for these programs, and all these verification checks. They're all, for the most part, are carried out through text and various tools which are related to text. Whether they be watch lists or open source verifications, right, Damien?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all start. If Bruno Lecuyer wants to bank or wants to have a new citizenship somewhere in the world, what we will make first, what the agent will make first, is an identity check, and then it will kick off. It will start. So from that moment on, it will ask you your ID document, and then we'll follow the entire processes. So from the KYC, know your citizen check, as recommended in your very interesting paper, white paper, and then all along the chain up to the very deep dive, in-depth assessment done by researchers and law enforcement people. The thing is, the problem I see, which is all again very, very similar to the banking industry, I see you as some sort of I see the investment migration industry as almost part of the banking industry at some point, or with very, very similar challenges. So when I say that, it means that banking, for example, they still have, after 20 years of massive investment, a problem into the identity resolution. So let's say if Bruno Lecuyer wants to bank or wants to have a passport somewhere in the world, if it's in Europe with an accidental alphabet, there will be no problem. But if this Chinese, for example, person is coming with the name of Li Yu and with a very common name and with some attributes which are very, very generic, the compliance officer, wherever he is, if he works with a wealth management compliance desk, or if he works with a CBI unit or as an agent, he will have all the difficulties of the world to identify the person. And one point which is, in my mind, very clear, having worked as an intelligence officer in the police department in Switzerland, even for a state with a very, very strong capacity, it's hard to identify someone with 100%, let's say, percentage and with a very, very high level of confidence. Even for a major state, it's hard to make sure that Bruno Lecuyer applying to citizenship is the right Bruno Lecuyer. So the effort being asked to the private sector, let's put it this way, in my way is, I would say, disproportionate, because it's something that even official structures have difficulties to figure out and to put in place. One point which is obvious to me, but I'm no one in this way. I'm thinking loud. It all starts with identification. So if you start checking Bruno Lecuyer only on the basis of the risk contained by his biographics, meaning his name only, you will have a lot of difficulties in matching Bruno Lecuyer, because there are many Bruno Lecuyer and many more Damien Martinez, which is a very, very common name. And not to speak about Li Yu or the 165,000 alternative variants of Muammar Gaddafi. So we have designed since the beginning the checking only on the basis of let's say alphabets and text-based screening. And today, what we're trying to do, what we're doing actually with FACEPOINT, after 3 years of massive investment, we are trying to put a face on someone, because we realized, exactly like we are doing in the world of biometrics, that there is much more information in Bruno Lecuyer's face than in Bruno Lecuyer's name. And if this logic applies, I mean, from a pure mathematical and from a pure scientific perspective, today there is even no debate about it. It has been sold out. It has been, let's say, it has been proclaimed by the NIST, which is a scientific bureau in the US, to tell that the biometrics is much more, let's say, powerful in terms of someone's identification. So what we're playing,
let's move to that then, the biometrics part, because it is quite cutting edge, isn't it? We don't hear very much about it, and it is increasingly used as the response to international threats, with a particular focus on, understandably so, on terrorism. First of all, but also now more in the fight against financial crime. It all starts with identification, doesn't it? Which in part you've mentioned. Can you talk us through the biometrics and the relevance to citizenship by investments, please?
Absolutely, it's a fascinating question, and it's even more fascinating that I think this is typically the kind of topic that the IMC will need to address to justify in the future the good effort is putting on the table on due diligence. And again, it's a quick win because we're doing that. We're not doing that for you precisely for the investment migration, but we're doing that for the community and also for governments. And as I said before, to take again my example about this Chinese diplomat or from this Iranian diplomat who wants to immigrate somewhere in the world, if you have the possibility through various mechanisms to also to extract the pictures from a still image or through a video, you have then a capacity to identify the person which is at risk. So this is, we think that this evolution will help, especially in the context of the first step. When you look at your white paper, Bruno, you identify several steps in the due diligence. And the very first one is around identification. And one thing funny in your document, reading that again today at the lunchtime, I noticed that you even say that the agent would be in a capacity to check, to recognize the picture of the document submitted by the applicant to, let's say, alternative sources, might be Google or some other things. But today, this operation can be done quite easily by a machine and with a much higher efficiency. So if you give to let's say, a state-of-the-art algorithm, the same one being used, let's say, by key law enforcement agencies, the robustness of the verification is much higher than the human eye. So This is something that we're now inventing. We pioneer in this with the team, with my ex. We have some ex-watchlist, traditional watchlist colleagues who joined us, and we're putting together this data because yearly there are 3,000 billion pictures released in the world. 3,000 billion pictures, and so you can find all the material you need to spot on the one you need to work on. So this is the kind of things we now working on. We call it a no-name screening process. So we don't take into account at all the name. We just rely on the biometrics attribute to make sure that we identify properly the person we have in front of us. So in a way, we go beyond like the existing check being performed with the traditional watch list, and which produce a lot of false positives. So the problem today with an agent or with anyone in this business is the time spent with this verification. So if you, let's say, if you spend hours and hours trying to document that Bruno Lecuyer is the right Bruno Lecuyer, and you have no capacity to judge, you expose yourself legally, you expose your government, you expose your program. So it's a tricky equation.
What you mentioned all 3,000 billion pictures annually. That's a lot of data, isn't it? That's lots of zeros and ones. What is the rate of false positives that might come in, and how does a system cope with changing facial features such as surgery? That's a question that came in through the DAC.
So unfortunately, very unfortunately, that's not a format where I can play with the tool. It's really unfortunate because it would show you that the machine is designed. The machine we use in the back is the one from a group which is very well known in the world of biometrics called IDEMIA Group. It's a multinational company, but the same applies for other competitors. Today, I mean, yearly there are 2,000 publications per year around facial recognition. So it becomes really super powerful. So in the use case you mentioned, Bruno, the machine goes beyond this facial surgery quite easily, because the points of contacts are the eyes or the distance from the nose and things like that, and the machine recognize anytime. So it's interesting because we have multiple scenarios, and if the person who is asking the question can join us, it's interesting. We have, for example, OFAC designated individuals, especially Colombian narco traffickers in the late 90s, who changed their faces and who were recognized because of facial recognition. So there are already examples in the real life around the capacity for the machine to recognize.
Interesting. Looking at the potential abuse that you've mentioned, how is the current system being abused in fact in terms of identity, and how does biometrics overcome this?
If you ascertain, it's very, it's a bit the same situation which is happening now in the banking. Because of COVID crisis, you have less and less face-to-face onboarding. So it's not you, Bruno Lecuyer, who is going to come to your bank in Geneva or in Brussels to open a bank account face-to-face with your account manager. It's not happening this. Today, what you do is you got a digital onboarding, so you show your face, and then you show your ID document, and then the machine matches your face with your ID document and says, hey, that's right, that's Bruno Lecuyer. So this is an authentication processes in place, and which is very robust. So in my view, for example, speaking about your industry, for me, it strikes me a bit that this is something not in place. Like if you come from far away, from Iran, China, whatever it is, and you apply to a program, you should have a documentary process which matches the face you show to at the onboarding timing, and then the document you apply for. And so this initial face it reconciles your identity. You have plenty of providers on the market doing this for very cheap, and so it tells you that the person in front of you has a legitimate identity, at least from a process perspective. And then you can initiate the screening, you can initiate all the steps, verification, watch list, enhanced due diligence, and all the necessary steps going forward. So yeah, this is why the biometric side is absolutely key in the processes.
Do you know actually of programs globally that are using such systems of biometrics? Because of course the pandemic and the global lockdowns, and now the lack of availability in terms of air travel has sort of put a bit of a bottleneck in the industry. We're seeing that open up a little bit. The conversations I've had with heads of citizenship by investment unit said, yeah, we had a reasonably quiet 3 to 4 months, but we've adapted. And the Caribbean have done particularly well in adapting to the situation. But do you know of examples of citizenship by investment units and governments that are using biometrics in the application of citizenship by investments?
No, I don't. But I think that the future, and I will be very, very interesting in linking up with the IMC and with any stakeholder involved, because I think it's a first secure step in the process, which open multiple doors, because it means also that you have, I'm thinking now about the CBI, the CBI unit part for the governmental part. It gives you also a much better documentation, much more consistent for periodical review, for perpetual review. And we can see from Cyprus that it's also a major pain point. The periodical review is an absolutely key component of the investment migration environment. And so once you get the picture, once you get the document, also in this what they call EIDV, the identity proofing process, you can also check if the document is genuine or not. So you have today some patterns to detect if it's a real Chinese passport or not, or real Russian passport or not. So you get all sorts of fraud documentation provisions as an early step, and then you can follow down the road and do your as a lean process, you know, a very lean process, and all digital. And it's quite cool also from an applicant perspective. So it's cool, it's fluid, it's contactless. It's indolore. I don't know how to say that in English, but it's painless in a sense. You don't have to. It's not invasive. You take your selfie. You send. It's like Uber or Airbnb, and it's quite fluid as a process.
All right. Okay. How have you created this database of faces? Where do you get this data from, Damien?
It's fascinating. I spent 10 years with Watchlists. 10 years with Watchlists. It's a brand I love. I love Watchlists. I love this raffinative people, and I know you get along with James Swinson and all these people. I really like the work they do since ever. And we wanted to go, or Sylvia and all. We wanted to go one step further. So we wanted to go to the next point. So I had the feeling that nothing was really invented since the last 20 years and in the world of Watchlist. And we knew that there was much more information in Bruno Lécuyer's face than in his name. And so we started to raise capital around FACEPOINT. And then we have built up this database, and today we equip governments with it, and we equip, you know, key clients. And but again, on key topics. So the database is highly framed for obvious legal reasons. So we frame it to the regulatory topics, being terrorism and political violence. So we have this field first. Then sanctions and embargoes. So just to give you an idea, we're putting a face on sanctioned individuals. So in the case of OFAC, for example, we put a face on 88% of the OFAC listed individuals, which is a good win in terms of compliance. Then a third category, which is organized crime, and we're quite good at that. And I think this is something useful also in your industry, because we put, you know, all the faces of Russian criminals, or without stigmatizing any population. It can be French, it can be Corsica, it can be whatever, but we have many of the worldwide population, I mean, of the criminal, serious crime population, mafias and others, and then financial crime, and finally PEPs. So we have also a significant, so we have today several million pictures on this, and it's in the documentation. And yeah, we align to the regulatory agenda, trying to find the faces which might be of interest for the regulated entities. And yeah, this is what we do with a lot of patience, because it's really enthusiastic as an activity to do this. We find an legitimate interest in doing that.
Okay. How do you deal with people who are not on the database, for example?
What do you mean?
Sort of, I guess that maybe some people have gone through the sieve and are not on this, you know, this database that you've built. Is that possible? First of all, I guess that's the question.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, because no database on Earth is complete by definition. So, and especially in countries, it's a never growing effort. So in some countries, you have also a problem of information availability, because What we do is called open source intelligence. So we only work with publicly available document, like exactly the same organizations you know well about. And the problem with that is that you will find easy information in Europe and some other countries. In the US, you will have plenty, but in some highly exposed countries, you will have a problem of access to information, because simply the information is not, the reliable information is not available. So we have in some jurisdictions a problem of completeness of the information. And so it might be possible we miss, you know, an important path, but on the long run, we think that we're progressing like any data company in the world. The ones who come to you saying that they have everyone, as you know, it's not really serious as a statement. So it's a long time. It's a long term run.
All right, Damien, I'm looking at the time, and we're running short a little bit as ever. I want to probe you a little bit in what your thoughts are in terms of the Cypriot Citizenship by Investment program, which has been very successful in attracting a lot of foreign direct investment post the banking crisis that Cyprus suffered in 2012-13. The program's been suspended now for reasons that everybody's aware of. It's a word of caution, of course, to our viewers. It is very early stages. There should be a full investigation into the allegations that have been made in the recent broadcast. But in the interim, the program is going to be suspended on the 1st of November. What recommendations would you make if there are some Cypriots professionals on this broadcast, but if you could reach out to the government, the policymakers in Cyprus, what recommendations would you make to them whilst they redraft potentially a new citizenship by investment program on the obviously on the focused on the due diligence aspect of all of this?
It's a very vast question, but I think that it's possible. It's possible to do it. It's possible to have in the investment. This is why today we speak together, and this is why I believe, contrary to other people, that the IMC, that the investment migration industry is profitable for some kind of countries, and I think that it's in the case of Cyprus. I won't elaborate that much, simply because I don't know the situation precisely. I just read the news like you did, but my point is to say it's doable to rebuild everything from having a pure compliant system from the beginning. It's just impossible to have a double system with a shady system in parallel to an official one. Just it's beginning of like the disaster to operate like this. But if you have the ambition to create from scratch with the responsibility from the agents to the agency to everyone to build something solid, the recent experiences with some of the countries show that it's possible, and that you have information at all the stages of the mechanisms to do it. And one thing I would tend to avoid is to there are two other things I would say. First is there is one thing which always shocked me in this industry. It's a perpetual monitoring. If you're a bank,
right?
Actually, if you're a ultra net worth management desk or wealth management desk, you screen, you're due to screen your high-risk individuals, so high-risk profiles. You do it on a monthly basis, bi-monthly, it depends. But let's say if you give away a passport, you need to have a perpetual monitoring, and not just on the basis of a press release to come and say we made a mistake and things like that. So first point. Second point is a political today there is a bit of naivety around this these programs also, in my views, because you can be in a situation where your program is being instrumented, as I said before, in the context in a regional tense content. So in the context, for example, this is a EU versus Turkey, and
right.
where your program unwillingly you are abused from the. I mean, there could be some interpretations on the program and take it at the political level to make it a big story out of it. So yeah, as I said before, compliance is politics. So anytime you put yourself in a complex situation, it becomes quickly political in the case of the investment migration. But it's possible in the case of Cyprus, and I think you're seeing the same. Maybe it's going to. They need a 6 months, maybe 1 year effort to do all the remediation and rescreening and all of that. But I think they're going to do the audit in any case.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. I think it's actually a really great opportunity for Cyprus to take a step back, take stock of all the good that this program has done, and take 6 to 9 months. I would think it's probably even 9 to 12 months to sit down, restructure the program, and reformulate it in a framework which is, acceptable to policymakers, and is in line with global anti-money laundering directives, taking into consideration, of course, GDPR and all the other regulatory and legislative tools that are out there to ensure that at the end they come out with a very robust product or robust legal migration routes. So I think it's a really good opportunity for Cyprus, and I look forward to engaging with Cyprus on this matter. But unfortunately, we have
just a quick thing, Bruno.
Right.
Just a quick on Cyprus. They were capable in identifying ISIS members with biometrics a couple of months ago. So they were capable of identifying, I think it's a dozen of guys, and very early on, and they were like super powerful in this kind of early identification. So what has been done in the context of counterterrorism with the government of Cyprus, I think they can do it legitimately with their investment and migration program.
Absolutely, really interesting, and it's a great opportunity to have almost a brand new EU program. Damien Martinez, it's been very educational. I've certainly personally learned a lot and updated myself on the possibilities. We look forward to hearing more on FACEPOINT as it rolls out its suite of products. For our viewers, I hope you've enjoyed and found today's session interesting. Of course, I'll try and switch my camera back on so that you can see me. Yes, there you are. Please remember that you have a handout section for information about FACEPOINT, about the Investment Migration Council education and training. Do reach out to ourselves or to Damien through his LinkedIn or Twitter accounts. And as ever, if you're not already a member of the IMC, visit our website for information on joining and supporting our work, and of course for daily updates on what's happening in the industry right now. In the meantime, we'll be back on the 11th of November, so do stay tuned for updates on that particular broadcast. Until then, please stay safe, and thanks again for joining us today, wherever in the world you are. And Damien, once again, thank you very much for joining from Paris, and myself, it's a very good afternoon from Brussels.
Introducing the Certification in Investment Migration from the Investment Migration Council, the first structured learning product of its kind globally, designed for you. Explore the bite-sized learning pathway of each module on our custom online platform. You can track your progress as you go and learn at a pace that suits you, with an estimated 5 hours of study time per module. The Certification in Investment Migration contributes to the development of professional competencies and standards for those new to or already working in the industry. So, what are you waiting for? Visit our website to start your learning journey today.